So, how does a hateful idea spiral into a state-run system of mass murder? It's a terrifying question. Today we're going to break down the Nazi ideology of annihilation, really look at the step-by-step process that turned a twisted worldview into, well, a factory of death.
You know, it all started with one core, really poisonous idea. The Nazi worldview completely threw out the concept of human equality. Instead, they put in its place this rigid hierarchy based on race. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some casual belief. It was the absolute foundation for everything, and I mean everything, that followed.
So, what did this hierarchy actually look like? Well, right at the very top, they put the so-called Aryans, the master race in their eyes. And then at the absolute bottom were the Jews. And they weren't just seen as inferior, but as an anti-race, basically the total opposite of their vision, their ultimate enemy. And everyone else? Slavs, black people, they were all just ranked somewhere in the middle of that twisted pyramid.
All right, so now we're going to get into the ideology of hate, how they corrupted theories of science and geography. See, to build this worldview, the Nazis didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air. No, what they did was they took existing concepts from science and politics and just twisted them into something absolutely monstrous.
A huge part of their strategy was corrupting science. Think about it. They grabbed Charles Darwin's ideas of evolution and survival of the fittest. But Darwin was talking about a natural process, right? The Nazis, they warped it into a justification for mass murder. Their logic was chillingly simple. The strongest race, the Aryans, must survive, and to do that, they had to eliminate the weak.
And it wasn't just science they twisted. The other pillar of their ideology was all about geography. Hitler had this concept he called Lebensraum, which literally means living space. He was convinced that Germany needed to expand its borders, pushing eastward into countries like Poland and Russia. The goal, to bring all ethnic Germans into one massive empire and grab all the land and resources they'd need to dominate. And tragically, Poland became the first terrible laboratory for this vision.
Okay, so with this ideology of racial purity and expansion locked in, what was the next logical step for them? Well, they had to define who didn't belong in their new racial state. So who exactly was on their list of undesirables?
And the list, it was long, and it was absolutely horrific. Now, while Jewish people were targeted the most viciously and most systematically, they were far from the only victims. You had Sinti and Roma people, black people, Slavs like Russians and Poles. They were all considered subhuman or racially inferior. But the ideology was so extreme, so twisted, that it even turned on their own. And you can see that terrifying logic so clearly in what they called the euthanasia program. Under this program, even German citizens who were considered mentally or physically unfit, people they deemed impure, were murdered. I mean, think about that. It just goes to show that absolutely no one was safe from being labeled undesirable. Okay, let's get into the methodical process now. The three-step annihilation. And this is a really, really crucial point. The Holocaust wasn't some spontaneous act of rage. No way. It was a cold, calculated, three-stage process. It was designed to first isolate people, then concentrate them, and finally, eliminate them.
So here are the steps to death. The path to annihilation was built in these three distinct stages. First came exclusion, from 1933 to 1939. Then ghettoization, from 1940 to 1944, and finally annihilation, from 1941 onwards. And you have to see how each step was a deliberate move, designed to make the next one feel almost inevitable.
Let's start with stage 1, exclusion. The message here was essentially, you have no right to live among us as citizens. This first stage, running from 33 to 39, was all about stripping people of their basic rights, their jobs, their place in society. The goal was to send a crystal clear message: you are not one of us.
And they did this through cold, bureaucratic laws. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 are a perfect example. These laws legally redefined what it meant to be a citizen, and just like that, with the stroke of a pen, German Jews lost their citizenship. They were forbidden from marrying other Germans. They were legally made outcasts in the only country they'd ever called home.
And of course, these legal measures went hand in hand with economic ruin and outright terror. Jewish businesses were boycotted, people were kicked out of government jobs, their properties were just taken. And this all built up to state-sanctioned violence, culminating in the horrific 1938 pogrom we know as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, when synagogues were burned and Jewish people were attacked all across Germany.
So, once people were socially and legally cut off, what was the next step? Stage 2, ghettoization. This is where they were physically removed. The message got even harsher. It went from, "You have no right to live among us as citizens," to simply, "You have no right to live among us."
And a key tool in this stage was making people visible targets. All Jews were forced to wear a yellow Star of David on their clothes. It was a brand, a symbol that segregated them from everyone else and made them incredibly vulnerable. That mark was even stamped on all their legal papers. It was everywhere. From there, they were forced into ghettos. These were overcrowded, walled-off sections of cities, like in Warsaw and Lodz. And before they were herded inside, they had to surrender everything they owned, all their wealth. These ghettos weren't just places to live. They were designed to be death traps, just filled with misery, hunger, and disease.
And this one quote from the source material it says it all. "This is all I have to sell." It really captures the absolute desperation. People were left with nothing, trying to survive in conditions that were purposefully designed to kill them slowly. The ghettos were just one more deliberate, horrifying step toward the final goal.
And that brings us to the third and final stage. Stage 3, annihilation. Beginning around 1941, the message became its most brutally direct form yet. You have no right to live. At this point, the whole system became an industrial process of murder. People were herded from the ghettos and concentration camps onto what the historical sources killingly call goods trains. Just think about that term, goods trains. It shows the complete and total dehumanization of the victims. And these trains transported them to camps built for one single purpose, mass murder.
And these were the death camps. Places like Belzec, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Treblinka, Chalno, and Majdanek. These camps, mostly in occupied Poland, became the infamous death factories. They weren't prisons. They were designed with one horrific purpose: the systematic, assembly-lined killing of millions and millions of human beings.
So, this is it. This is where it all led. The ideology of hate, the twisted science, that methodical three-step plan, it all came together in what the Nazis chillingly called the final solution. And all of this happened under the shadow of World War II. You see, the chaos of the war gave them the perfect cover. For the Nazi regime, the war for territory and the war against undesirables weren't two different things. No, they were two sides of the same coin. They were completely inseparable, one fueling the other in a single, brutal campaign of conquest and murder. And the final act? It was carried out with a terrifying industrial efficiency. Mass killings in the gas chambers weren't chaotic. They were timed, calculated procedures that took just minutes. They were executed with what the sources describe as scientific precision. And so, we're left right back where we started, with that same crucial question. How does this happen? Understanding this history, it isn't just about memorizing facts and dates. It's about seeing the chillingly logical process. It's a stark, horrifying reminder of how a hateful idea, when it's armed with state power and methodical planning, can lead to one of the greatest atrocities the world has ever seen.